Whales are wonderful creatures. Here is a list of whales sorted from smallest at the top to biggest at the bottom. Oh no, the whales are all out of order. What shall we do? We will use quicksort. In quicksort, we choose the element in the middle and call it the pivot. Then we tag the first element, the minke whale in this case, as I, and we tag the last element, J. We increment I if the whale at I, in this case the minke whale, is smaller than the whale at the pivot. So since the minke whale is smaller than the pivot, then that means we're going to increment I. Similarly, with J, we decrement J if the whale at J is larger than the whale at the pivot. In this case, the finback is larger than the sperm whale, so we decrement J. So now I points to the narwhal and J points to the human. The narwhal is smaller than the sperm whale, so we increment I, but the human is not larger than the sperm whale, so we do not decrement J. Now I points to the blue whale. The blue whale is not smaller than the sperm whale, and so we can no longer increment or decrement either I or J, and since we can't change I and J anymore, we need to swap I and J. Alright, so we swapped I and J. Now we increment I and decrement J again. So now I is pointing to the sperm whale and J is pointing to the humpback. But the sperm whale is not smaller than the pivot, technically, because a sperm whale cannot be smaller than itself. And the humpback is not larger than the sperm whale. So we can't increment I and we can't increment J. So what do? We swap I and J. So now we have swapped I and J. We can increment I and decrement J. But now I and J have crossed each other. If I and J have crossed each other, we know that the size of everything above the pivot is less than or equal to the size of the pivot. And we also know that the size of everything below the pivot is greater than or equal to the size of the pivot. So, in other words, we have essentially divided the array into two sections. A section above the sperm whale, where all the whales are smaller than the sperm whale, and a section above the sperm whale, where all the whales are bigger than the sperm whale. And so we can sort of divide this big problem into two smaller problems. Essentially, we split the array into two subarrays. One subarray on each side of the pivot. So as you can see here, we have one subarray containing the minke whale, narwhal, human, and humpback, and we have one subarray containing the sperm whale, blue whale, and finback. And essentially, all we need to do now is do the same thing we did before, but on each of the subarrays, right? So now we choose a pivot, the narwhal in this case, and we have to put everything that's smaller than the narwhal above the narwhal and put everything that's larger than the narwhal below the narwhal. And when we do that, we can split it into 2 more subarrays, and we can just keep splitting into subarrays until the entire list is sorted. This occurs when all subarrays have a length of 1. So I will show you what this process looks like in the next few slides. And as you can see, all of the whales are now in their own subarray, which means that the entire list or the entire array has been sorted. Hooray!